The tension in Fleming's office was thick as Sean Connery faced the man who had dismissed him before they'd even properly met. Fleming's cold greeting made it clear he considered Sean beneath Bond's sophisticated standards. "You're not quite what I had in mind," Fleming said with obvious condescension. Sean could have walked away wounded. Instead, he did something so unexpected, so perfectly Bond-like, that Fleming sat back in stunned silence, realizing his mistake immediately. But this story isn't just about first impressions gone wrong. It's about how literary snobbery nearly destroyed the most iconic character in cinema history, and how one Scottish actor's quiet dignity forced the world's most famous spy novelist to completely rewrite his own creation. If you've ever wondered how class warfare shaped the Bond legacy, subscribe now, because what happened between Fleming and Sean reveals the hidden battle that almost prevented 007 from ever reaching the screen. Ian Lancaster Fleming embodied everything the British establishment represented in 1961. Educated at Eton College, trained at Sandhurst Military Academy, connected to the highest echelons of society through family wealth and wartime intelligence work, Fleming moved through London's elite circles with the casual confidence of inherited privilege. When he created James Bond in 1953 with Casino Royale, he drew from his own sophisticated world of gentlemen's clubs, expensive cars, and refined tastes that separated the upper classes from everyone else. Fleming's Bond was essentially an idealized version of himself and his social circle. Educated, urbane, effortlessly superior. The character spoke with perfect received pronunciation, knew fine wines, appreciated classical music, and navigated high society with natural ease. This wasn't accidental character development. It was Fleming's deeply held belief that certain qualities could only emerge from proper breeding and expensive education. The very idea that someone from Edinburgh's working-class streets could embody his creation struck Fleming as almost comically inappropriate. When producers Albert Broccoli and Harry Saltzman began their search for the perfect Bond in early 1961, they initially shared Fleming's vision of aristocratic sophistication. Their first choices reflected this bias. Cary Grant, whose Hollywood glamour masked his own working-class Bristol origins; David Niven, a genuine product of Sandhurst and the British officer class; and Patrick McGoohan, whose theatrical training and elegant bearing suggested the refinement Fleming demanded. Each of these men possessed what Fleming considered essential Bond qualities: natural authority, cultivated sophistication, and the indefinable quality he called breeding. The casting process that would eventually bring Sean Connery to Fleming's attention began almost by accident. Director Terence Young, himself a product of Cambridge University and the Guards Regiment, had worked with Sean on a forgotten film called Action of the Tiger 2 years earlier. Young remembered not Sean's aristocratic bearing, he had none, but something more fundamental, an animal magnetism and physical confidence that couldn't be taught or faked. When Young mentioned Sean's name to the producers, their initial reaction mirrored Fleming's class-conscious skepticism. Sean's path to that fateful meeting with Fleming had been shaped by experiences completely foreign to the author's privileged world. Growing up in Fountainbridge, one of Edinburgh's poorest neighbourhoods, Sean had learned survival skills that no public school could teach. His father Joe worked sporadically at the rubber mill when drink didn't interfere, while his mother Euphemia cleaned houses for Edinburgh's wealthy, providing Sean with early glimpses of the class divisions that would later complicate his relationship with Fleming's vision of sophistication. But Fleming's first encounter with Sean would challenge every assumption he held about class and character. The meeting that would define both men's legacies took place in Fleming's elegantly appointed Mayfair office on a grey November morning in 1961. Fleming had agreed to this consultation with obvious reluctance, viewing it as a tedious concession to commercial concerns rather than a serious creative discussion. He expected to dismiss this working-class actor quickly and return to more important matters, perhaps lunch at his club or an afternoon at the gaming tables that inspired so much of Bond's casino expertise. Sean arrived wearing his best suit, borrowed from a friend, and slightly too large, his shoes polished but showing their age. His thick Scottish accent immediately marked him as an outsider in Fleming's refined world, and his direct manner of speaking, learned in Edinburgh pubs rather than Cambridge lecture halls, struck the author as crude and inappropriate for sophisticated company. Fleming's initial assessment was swift and dismissive. This man possessed none of the qualities essential for portraying the world's most elegant secret agent. The conversation began awkwardly, with Fleming asking perfunctory questions about Sean's acting experience, while clearly having already reached his conclusion. Sean's background, milk delivery, bodybuilding, repertory theatre, only confirmed Fleming's prejudices about the unbridgeable gap between working-class ambition and genuine sophistication. When Sean mentioned his service in the Royal Navy, Fleming showed polite interest, but even military experience couldn't overcome the fundamental class barriers that Fleming considered insurmountable. What happened next became the subject of conflicting accounts that would fuel tensions between the two men for years. According to Fleming's later recollections, shared privately with friends at his club, Sean demonstrated a disturbing lack of cultural knowledge, mispronouncing French wine names and showing ignorance about topics Fleming considered basic elements of any gentleman's education. Sean's version, revealed only after Fleming's death, painted the author as condescending and prejudiced, more interested in social credentials than acting ability or screen presence. The turning point came when Fleming, perhaps testing Sean's suitability for a role requiring physical confidence, made an offhand remark about the importance of presence and natural authority in portraying Bond. Sean's response, not verbal but physical, involved a simple gesture that demonstrated exactly the kind of quiet menace and controlled power that Bond required. He stood slowly from his chair, moved with predatory grace to Fleming's drinks cabinet, poured himself a whiskey without invitation, and fixed Fleming with a stare that contained both challenge and complete self-assurance. Fleming, who had spent his entire life surrounding himself with deferential subordinates and social equals who understood their place in Britain's rigid hierarchy, found himself genuinely unsettled by Sean's casual assumption of authority. This wasn't the polite confidence of his class. It was something more primitive and dangerous, exactly what his fictional character needed, but completely outside Fleming's personal experience or comfort zone. The realization that would follow would force Fleming to confront uncomfortable truths about his own creation. Fleming's discomfort with Sean extended beyond simple class prejudice into deeper questions about masculine authority and the sources of power that his Bond character represented. Throughout his privileged life, Fleming had encountered strength primarily in institutional forms: military rank, social position, inherited wealth, educational credentials. Sean's power came from entirely different sources: physical capability earned through manual labor, psychological resilience developed through genuine hardship, and personal magnetism that owed nothing to external validation or social approval. The meeting continued for another 30 minutes, during which Fleming found himself increasingly frustrated by his inability to categorize or dismiss this man who refused to acknowledge the social boundaries that governed Fleming's world. Sean answered questions with directness rather than the elaborate courtesy Fleming expected, expressed opinions without seeking approval, and displayed a confidence that seemed completely independent of Fleming's judgment or acceptance. This independence particularly troubled Fleming, whose relationships typically involved clear hierarchies with himself in the superior position. When Sean finally left Fleming's office, the author sat alone trying to process an encounter unlike any in his social or professional experience. His immediate instinct was to reject Sean entirely, to insist that the producers find someone more suitable, more trainable, more aware of proper boundaries between classes. But something about Sean's presence lingered uncomfortably, challenging Fleming's assumptions about the sources of authority and the nature of masculine power that formed the foundation of his Bond character. Fleming's phone call to the producers later that afternoon revealed his internal conflict. He described Sean as too rough around the edges and lacking the refinement necessary for Bond, but his criticism carried less conviction than usual. When pressed for specific objections, Fleming found himself unable to articulate exactly what bothered him about Sean, beyond vague references to breeding and background. The producers, more concerned with commercial appeal than social credentials, heard something in Fleming's uncertainty that suggested possibilities rather than dismissal. But the real test of Fleming's prejudices was yet to come. Sean's screen test, conducted at Pinewood Studios in early 1962, would become the moment when Fleming's theoretical objections collided with undeniable visual evidence of Sean's suitability for the role. Fleming attended reluctantly, expecting to witness confirmation of his concerns about Sean's lack of sophistication and natural authority. Instead, he found himself watching something that challenged every assumption he had made about the requirements for portraying his creation. The test involved Sean performing several key Bond moments, introducing himself with the famous James Bond line, engaging in physical combat, and delivering dialogue that required both menace and charm. Director Terence Young, who understood both Fleming's concerns and Sean's potential, had coached Sean carefully on the superficial elements of sophistication: how to wear a tuxedo, how to hold a cigarette, how to move with aristocratic bearing, while allowing Sean's natural intensity and physical magnetism to shine through unchanged. Fleming watched in fascinated horror as Sean transformed before the cameras from the rough-edged Scotsman he remembered from their office meeting into something far more dangerous and compelling than Fleming had ever imagined Bond could be. Sean's delivery of the signature introduction carried none of the polished urbanity Fleming had envisioned, but it possessed a quiet menace and sexual magnetism that made Fleming's written version seem pale by comparison. This wasn't the gentleman spy Fleming had created. This was something more primitive and powerful. The physical sequences particularly troubled Fleming, because they revealed capabilities completely outside his own experience or imagination. Sean moved with a predator's economy and grace, suggesting violence held carefully in check, rather than the civilized restraint Fleming associated with proper breeding. When Sean fought, it looked real and dangerous in ways that no amount of theatrical training could fake, drawing from actual physical hardship and street knowledge that Fleming's privileged background had never required him to develop. Most disturbing for Fleming was Sean's natural screen presence, which commanded attention without effort or artifice. The camera loved Sean's face, finding angles and expressions that revealed intelligence, danger, and sexuality in combinations Fleming hadn't known were possible. This wasn't the result of proper education or social training. It was something far more elemental and threatening to Fleming's understanding of how authority and appeal functioned in British society. What Fleming didn't know during those crucial weeks of casting decisions was that a conspiracy of sorts had developed among the film's key creative personnel, designed to overcome his class-based objections and secure Sean's casting regardless of the author's preferences. The leader of this informal alliance was Dana Broccoli, wife of producer Albert Broccoli, and a woman whose own working-class American background made her instinctively sympathetic to Sean's situation. Dana had been present during several of Sean's meetings with the production team, and her reaction to him had been immediate and unequivocal. Unlike her husband and his partner, Harry Saltzman, who were primarily concerned with commercial considerations, Dana recognized something in Sean that transcended questions of breeding or social position. Her famous comment to Albert after Sean's departure, "Cubby, this man has got it," would become part of Bond legend, but it represented more than simple star recognition. Dana's influence over the casting decision extended far beyond her personal opinion. She possessed an intuitive understanding of female audience appeal that the male-dominated production team lacked, and her conviction that Sean would generate exactly the kind of sexual magnetism necessary for Bond's success carried significant weight in the producer's calculations. More importantly, she was willing to use her considerable behind-the-scenes influence to neutralize Fleming's objections and ensure Sean received proper consideration. The campaign Dana orchestrated involved careful management of Fleming's exposure to Sean, strategic timing of screen tests and meetings, and systematic undermining of the author's class-based concerns through practical demonstrations of Sean's screen effectiveness. She encouraged Terence Young to work extensively with Sean on surface polish while preserving the raw magnetism that made him special, creating a version of Bond that satisfied commercial requirements while challenging Fleming's preconceptions. Fleming's final capitulation to Sean's casting came not through sudden enlightenment about class prejudice, but through gradual recognition that his commercial interests required acknowledging realities he preferred to ignore. The decision process extended over several weeks of increasingly tense negotiations between Fleming, the producers, and their financial backers, with Sean's fate hanging in the balance, while powerful men argued about the relationship between social position and commercial appeal. The turning point arrived when Fleming was forced to confront box office projections and market research that demonstrated Sean's superior appeal to target audiences. Test screenings of Sean's footage, compared with similar material from more socially acceptable candidates, revealed audience responses that couldn't be dismissed or rationalized away. Women found Sean significantly more attractive and sexually compelling, while male audiences responded to his physical credibility and dangerous edge in ways that Fleming's preferred choices simply couldn't match. Fleming's agreement to Sean's casting came with conditions that revealed his continuing discomfort with the decision. He insisted on maintaining script approval to ensure that Bond's dialogue and behavior reflected proper sophistication, demanded that Sean receive extensive coaching in matters of style and deportment, and reserved the right to publicly distance himself from the characterization if it proved unsuitable. These demands reflected Fleming's belief that Sean's natural qualities, while cinematically effective, required significant modification to align with proper Bond standards. Sean's approach to embodying James Bond revealed an intelligence and strategic thinking that Fleming had not expected from someone of his background, challenging the author's assumptions about the relationship between formal education and genuine sophistication. Rather than attempting to mimic upper-class mannerisms or adopting an artificial persona, Sean began a careful study of power and authority that drew from sources completely outside Fleming's experience, while achieving results that exceeded the author's expectations. Working with director Terence Young, who became Sean's mentor in matters of style and presentation, Sean developed a version of Bond that combined surface sophistication with underlying menace in ways that Fleming's written character had never achieved. Young taught Sean the external elements of gentleman's behavior, how to wear expensive clothes, how to navigate formal social situations, how to project calm confidence in any environment, while encouraging him to maintain the dangerous edge that made him unique among potential Bond actors. The most significant aspect of Sean's Bond interpretation was his refusal to apologize for or disguise his working-class origins. Instead of attempting to become a convincing aristocrat, Sean created a character who had earned his sophistication through experience and achievement rather than inheritance and privilege. This Bond possessed confidence that came from proven capability rather than social position, authority that derived from personal power rather than institutional rank, and sophistication that had been consciously acquired rather than unconsciously absorbed. But Fleming's real education was about to begin with the release of Dr. No in October 1962, which delivered a commercial and critical verdict on Sean's Bond interpretation that Fleming could neither ignore nor dismiss. The film's unprecedented success, earning over $40 million worldwide against a production budget of just over $1 million, demonstrated audience hunger for exactly the kind of Bond that Sean had created. While Fleming's personal reservations seemed increasingly irrelevant beside such overwhelming popular approval, critics' responses to Sean's performance particularly stung Fleming, because they consistently praised elements of the characterization that directly contradicted the author's original vision. Sean's Bond was described as more believable, more dangerous, and more sexually compelling than Fleming's written version, with reviewers specifically noting the character's working-class edge and physical credibility as improvements over typical cinematic heroes. The critical consensus suggested that Sean had not merely portrayed Bond successfully, but had actually enhanced Fleming's creation. Fleming's private correspondence during this period, later released by his estate, revealed a man struggling with the implications of Sean's success. Letters to friends contained grudging acknowledgement of the film's commercial achievement, combined with continued expressions of discomfort about the characterization's departure from his original vision. Fleming seemed particularly troubled by suggestions that Sean's version of Bond was superior to his written character, viewing this as implicit criticism of his own understanding of masculinity and power. The most painful aspect of Dr. No's success for Fleming was its revelation of his own limitations as a creator of popular entertainment. His carefully crafted vision of upper-class sophistication had proved less appealing to global audiences than Sean's rougher-edged interpretation, suggesting that Fleming's personal experiences and prejudices had actually constrained rather than enhanced his creative vision. Sean's success forced Fleming to confront the possibility that his working-class star understood popular appeal better than he did. Fleming's response to Dr. No's success and Sean's interpretation of his character would fundamentally alter the trajectory of the Bond literary series. in ways that acknowledge Sean's superior understanding of what made the character compelling. Beginning with his next novel, On Her Majesty's Secret Service, written during 1962 and published the following year, Fleming began incorporating elements of Sean's characterization into his written version of Bond, essentially allowing his actor to reshape his own creation. The most obvious change involved Bond's background, which Fleming quietly revised to include Scottish heritage that directly reflected Sean's origins. Where previous novels had maintained careful ambiguity about Bond's family history, Fleming now provided specific details about Scottish ancestry that justified Sean's accent and cultural references. This revision represented more than simple accommodation. It was acknowledgement that Sean's interpretation had revealed possibilities in the character that Fleming's original conception had missed. More subtle, but equally significant, were changes in Bond's personality and behavior that reflected Fleming's growing appreciation for Sean's approach to the character. The literary Bond became more physically direct, less concerned with social niceties, more willing to rely on instinct rather than training. Fleming's descriptions of Bond's movements and fighting style began incorporating elements of Sean's screen presence, particularly his economy of motion and implied violence that had so impressed audiences worldwide. Despite his private acknowledgement of Sean's contributions to Bond's success, Fleming's public relationship with his star remained marked by underlying tension and unresolved class antagonism that would persist throughout their professional association. Fleming's interviews and public appearances consistently emphasized his own creative authority, while minimizing Sean's interpretive contributions, maintaining the fiction that the actor was simply executing Fleming's vision rather than fundamentally reshaping it. This public stance created ongoing friction with Sean, who was well aware of his actual contribution to Bond's evolution and resented Fleming's refusal to acknowledge it openly. Sean's own interviews began including subtle corrections to Fleming's version of events, particularly regarding the development of Bond's character and the sources of the film's success. The two men developed a pattern of polite public interaction that concealed fundamental disagreement about credit and creative authority. Fleming's death from heart disease in August 1964, at age 56, came at the height of the Bond phenomenon's initial success and before the full implications of Sean's interpretation had become apparent to the literary and entertainment world. The author's final months were marked by declining health and increasing recognition that his creation had evolved far beyond his original vision in ways that he could not control or fully understand. Sean's reaction to Fleming's death demonstrated the complexity of their relationship and the genuine respect that had developed despite their fundamental differences about class and creativity. Sean's public statements praised Fleming's imaginative achievement and acknowledged the author's contribution to his own success, while private comments revealed appreciation for Fleming's eventual recognition of his interpretive contributions, even if that recognition had never been fully public. The posthumous publication of Fleming's private papers and correspondence revealed the extent to which Sean's interpretation had influenced the author's thinking about Bond and popular entertainment. Letters from Fleming's final years showed increasing appreciation for Sean's instinctive understanding of audience appeal and acknowledgement that the actor had revealed possibilities in the character that formal education and upper-class background could not have provided. Fleming had learned from Sean about the sources of authentic authority and appeal. The Fleming-Sean dynamic represented more than simple creative collaboration or class conflict. It embodied broader changes in British society and culture during the 1960s that were transforming traditional relationships between social position, authority, and popular appeal. Sean's success as Bond demonstrated that working-class authenticity could be more compelling than upper-class sophistication, challenging fundamental assumptions about heroism and leadership that had dominated British entertainment for generations. Sean's Bond became a template for a new kind of British hero, one whose authority derived from personal capability rather than social position, whose sophistication was earned rather than inherited, and whose appeal transcended traditional class boundaries. This democratization of heroism reflected broader social changes occurring throughout Britain as traditional hierarchies weakened and merit-based advancement became more common and accepted. The story of Fleming's initial rejection of Sean and his subsequent forced recognition of the actor's superiority, illustrates the costs of class prejudice and the dangers of allowing social assumptions to override evidence and experience. Fleming's nearly catastrophic misjudgment of Sean's potential revealed how deeply ingrained prejudices could blind intelligent people to obvious truths and prevent them from recognizing extraordinary talent when it appeared in unexpected packages. Sean Connery's transformation from Fleming's reluctant choice to the definitive interpretation of James Bond represents one of entertainment history's greatest vindications of talent over prejudice, authenticity over artifice, and earned authority over inherited privilege. The working-class Scotsman, who was initially dismissed as too rough for sophisticated audiences, became the gold standard against which all subsequent Bond actors would be measured, proving that true star quality transcends social boundaries and cultural assumptions. Fleming's journey from condescending rejection to grudging acceptance to private acknowledgement of Sean's superior understanding of popular appeal revealed a man capable of growth despite deep-seated prejudices. His willingness to revise his own creation based on Sean's interpretation demonstrated intellectual honesty that overcame social conditioning, even if that evolution came slowly and incompletely. The collaboration between these two very different men created a character and an entertainment franchise that continues to influence popular culture more than 60 years later. Their story reminds us that the most successful creative partnerships often emerge from the most unlikely combinations of personalities and backgrounds, and that the tension between different perspectives can generate innovative solutions that neither collaborator could have discovered alone. James Bond's enduring appeal owes as much to the class conflict between his creator and his first interpreter as it does to either man's individual contributions, proving that great art often emerges from the creative friction between opposing worldviews and the ultimate triumph of authentic talent over social prejudice.